The doctors said the word quietly, like they were afraid it might break something else in the room. Dead. Machines were switched off one by one, the steady beeping that had filled the ICU for days fading into a hollow silence. The billionaire stood frozen, his hands trembling as he stared at his only son's still body, unable to cry, unable to breathe, unable to accept that all the money in the world had failed him. And outside the hospital, in the cold evening air, a barefoot homeless boy pressed his face to the glass, watching everything, about to make a decision that would change all of their lives forever. The boy's name was Arav. He slept behind a closed bakery, wrapped in torn cardboard, surviving on leftovers and kindness from strangers who rarely looked him in the eye. His mother had died years ago on a hospital bed just like this one, after doctors gave up too soon because she couldn't pay. Since that day, Arav had learned to fear hospitals and hate the word impossible. He wandered into the hospital only to escape the rain and warm his hands, but something pulled him toward the ICU window. Through the glass, he saw the man in the expensive suit collapse into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Arav didn't know what a billionaire was, but he knew grief. He recognized it the same way you recognize hunger. When the doctors walked out, shaking their heads, Arav heard one of them say, "There's nothing more we can do." The boy's heart started pounding. He stared at the motionless child on the bed, tubes removed, eyes closed, chest still. Suddenly, something felt wrong. Arav remembered his mother's final moments, how her chest had barely moved, how everyone thought she was gone, how she had squeezed his hand once more before the end. That memory burned inside him. Without thinking, Arav ran through the automatic doors and into the ICU. Nurses shouted. Security moved toward him, but the boy didn't stop. He climbed onto the bed, pressed his ear to the child's chest, and then did the unthinkable. Using what his mother had once taught him during a street first aid class, Arav began chest compressions, small hands pushing with all their strength. "Breathe," he whispered, tears falling onto the sheets. "Please breathe." The room erupted into chaos, shouts, alarms, footsteps, but then it happened. A faint cough, a weak gasp. The monitor flickered back to life. The child's chest rose. The billionaire looked up just as his son took a shallow breath. Doctors rushed back in, disbelief written across their faces. The boy was alive. Not stable, not safe, but alive. Arav was pulled away, scolded, nearly thrown out, until one doctor raised a hand and said, "Wait." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Tests were run, machines reattached, oxygen restored. Against every medical expectation, the child's heart kept beating. The billionaire walked over to Arav, knelt in front of him, and for the first time in years a man who owned cities couldn't find words. He simply held the homeless boy and cried. But that was only the beginning, and the real test was still coming. Days later, the story spread across the hospital. Some called it a miracle, others called it a medical anomaly. Lawyers warned the billionaire about liability, about rules being broken, about a homeless child causing chaos in a private ICU. Yet the billionaire couldn't forget the sight of Arav's shaking hands, or the way his son's chest had risen after everyone else had walked away. When his son finally opened his eyes, weak but alive, the first thing he whispered was, "There was a boy. He told me not to sleep." As the child recovered, doctors admitted the truth. They had been wrong. The heart had slowed so much it was nearly undetectable. They had followed protocol, but protocol had failed. Arav had not. Still, when the excitement faded, reality returned. Security escorted Arav out of the hospital. He went back to his cardboard bed, back to hunger, back to invisibility. The world moved on quickly, as it always did, except one man didn't. The billionaire searched for Arav across the city, through shelters, streets, and alleys. When he finally found him, the boy was sharing a piece of stale bread with a stray dog. The man sat beside him on the cold ground, ignoring his expensive coat, and asked the simplest question, "Why did you do it?" Arav shrugged. "Because everyone deserves one more try," he said. The words hit harder than any headline ever had. The billionaire offered him food, clothes, a home. Arav hesitated, afraid of promises that disappear. But this time, the promise stayed. Arav was enrolled in school, given a warm bed, and for the first time, someone listened to his dreams. He wanted to be a doctor, not the kind who gives up, but the kind who stays until the last breath. Years passed. The billionaire's son grew strong, his laughter filling a house that once echoed with silence. Arav grew taller, sharper, kinder. He studied harder than anyone, driven by a past he refused to let define him. On the day Arav graduated from medical school, he stood on a stage wearing a white coat, his hands steady now, his eyes filled with purpose. In the front row, the billionaire and his son watched, tears streaming freely. Later that night, Arav returned to the same hospital where everything had begun. He walked past the ICU, now a doctor, and paused at the glass. He remembered the cold floor, the fear, the moment everyone else walked away. He whispered a quiet promise to himself, to never let money decide who lives, to never confuse silence for death, to always try one more time. Because sometimes the world is saved not by power, wealth, or authority, but by a forgotten child who refuses to give up when everyone else already has.